Hey, everybody. This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good looking friends. Today's video is just random. I literally was looking at Reddit and someone had made a comment about Chelsea Davy and Cressida Bonus. And for some reason, something like triggered inside my head saying, well, in the book Spare, Harry really didn't go into too much detail about either of these women, specifically Cressida. And Cressida, back in the day, she was rumored to be getting really serious with Harry. And it was at one point anticipated that Harry was going to propose to Cressida. Back in 2020, Cressida gave a rare interview to the Daily Telegraph explaining why it didn't work out between her and Prince Harry. During the interview, she had hinted that she had a lot of fears about joining the royal family and that those fears may have contributed to the end of her and Harry's relationship. And in quotes, she has stated, the fear of failing, the fear of rejection, the fear of not getting it right, the fear of not being perfect. I think that has limited me in certain situations in my life, she had said. The couple broke up in the middle of 2014. From the looks of these photos, it doesn't look like he was the gentleman back in the day. But getting to the point of this video, so in 2021, this was posted on Markle News 1, and I had saved it. And for some reason, just seeing Cressida's name today just triggered off revisiting this, and I'd like to revisit it with you guys. I think right now the picture is now being painted a little bit more clear, in my opinion. So let me review it with you. Now, I don't know if any of this is true, so take it with a grain of salt. But after the last couple weeks of looking at this book Spare, it's actually validating what this anonymous person posted. So let me share it with you. The anonymous post begins. First, I'd like to state that I work for certain people in aristocratic circles. This story begins all the way back in 2014 when Prince Harry was seriously considering marriage to one Miss Cressida Bonus. The truth is, they agreed to get engaged in late 2015 and marry in 2016, but this never happened, as we all are painfully aware. The media report stated that Cressida didn't want to be royalty, but in truth, they were offered this deal to be working royals and do less than 120 engagements a year and retire early once William's children are old enough to take the bulk of the work. Cressida was actually fine with this. She intended to model herself after Mrs. Wessex, meaning Sophie, to be pretty low-key, have 2 children close in age, and live a cozy life. Rumor has it that Harry was asking his grandmother for a ring from a certain royal collection. Now, this fell through. Why? Not because Cressida didn't want to be a royal. She certainly didn't mind living in a palace and getting access to the box of chocolates that Her Majesty owns, but she could not stand her husband comparing her to her sister-in-law. It is known in these circles that Harry has a sick tendency to one-up his brother. Everything needs to be better than William's. He wanted the 1A apartment or Diana's old apartments, but was denied. He wanted separate secretaries from William's. He wanted a dukedom in 2011. He wanted more. When William married in 2011 and he saw the wave of praise and popularity, he wanted just the same. Henry Windsor wanted a wife that could measure up to Mrs. Cambridge in looks, popularity, and appeal. Whatever Cressida did, he compared her to Mrs. Cambridge. Mrs. Cambridge told him this several times as she has a soft spot for him, but it fell on dead ears. Mrs. Cambridge advised Miss Bonus to think about the engagement, and Miss Bonus, bearing on ill will to Mrs. Cambridge, thought of the former Mrs. Wales and decided to dip, meaning leave. Cue in years of chasing after her, which failed miserably. His previous long-term lady didn't want to marry, period, but this one seemed good. So he went on a search and encountered the future Mrs. Sussex. She was very much a yes woman. Everything went at first, the parties, the drinks, the hunting, except Mrs. Sussex had a different reaction to being compared to Mrs. Cambridge. Instead of calling him out and leaving, she took it as in her head, little competition. Mrs. Sussex was willing to join the game of attempting to harm and one up Mr. and Mrs. Cambridge. Cue in the curiously wrong color of dress for a certain royal event. I think it was something where the theme was cream and blue, and she wore something dark green olive green. Mrs. Sussex has a particular disdain for Mrs. Cambridge and Mrs. Tyndall, except that Mrs. Tyndall told her off pretty quickly and never spoke to her because of an argument around a wedding date. Mrs. Cambridge and Mrs. Tyndall would both either been postpartum or expecting at the time, so they both asked for the wedding date to be pushed after a certain date. But Mrs. Sussex was having none of it. No one knows why. How does poor Miss Bonas tie into this? Mr. Sussex got cold feet multiple times before the wedding. He attempted to compensate by getting a certain color of carpet and something out of Granny's box of chocolates for the missus, but it just wasn't it. I wonder if that's the jewelry that's allegedly missing. Miss Bonus even visited Mr. Sussex days before the wedding and stayed a long time there. No one knows a thing about the conversation, but we can guess. The rumor mill has it that Mrs. Sussex might attempt to pull something the late Mrs. Wales did with the former Mrs. Parker Bowles once they split, which will be sooner than we expect, and her victim of choice might be Miss Bonus. Of course, Miss Bonus isn't Miss Bonus anymore. She is Mrs. Wentworth Stanley now. See? 2 last names now. Pieces are falling into place for Mrs. Sussex. Except Mrs. Sussex has a big enemy. He is actually big, quite a tall lad, with a very difficult job position waiting for him, like CEO and owner of the company at the same time. Mr. and Mrs. Sussex are petrified of him because they know if he releases the Kraken, Mrs. Sussex will be done, and she will take Mr. Sussex with her. Mrs. Sussex intends to do a series of interviews in this year pretending each is the last and only, except this time she's very aware that her enemy is looming over her. There were a lot of incidents where he would try to show up his brother, and the palace was able to surround him with people who were able to rein him in. Charlotte and Duchess couldn't envision a life where a petulant, drunken, bitter man was her partner. I lost track of the circle after I married and moved to France around the time Zara did. That's another relationship that's unrecoverable. They are doing them dirty now. Now let's remember that this was posted in 2021. I wasn't aware that Harry was super competitive against William until this book came out and he did all these interviews. That's when I finally realized that there was jealousy with Harry. No doubt that he's envious. And if you notice, he's said it many times throughout the book, as well as in these interviews, that the family was jealous of him and Meghan's success. The one thing that's obvious is that Cressida made the right decision. I don't think it's even so much being a part of the royal family, but being married to Harry. Could you imagine having to take care of a man-child? Because technically that's kind of what it is. And I'm sure Meghan is over it, and no doubt she is at the moment planning how she's going to escape out of this situation. Yeah, I do feel that there is another sit down coming, and it's going to come out of left field. I can totally see this. What do you guys think? Leave your comments below. Anyhow, I will be back soon with more content, but until then, be safe, and I will catch you later. Bye.
I was such a fraud.